You know, sometimes it just seems like we can't fully enjoy games anymore. And no, I'm not talking about the existential crisis you are having as you grow older and seemingly enjoy games less. That's another topic for another video, you freaking boomer. I'm talking about how there will always be people saying that the game you are playing is absolute garbage, or that the hype of the game will die in a couple of months after release. And you know what? While certainly these may seem like negative takes, at the very least, the former is someone's opinion, and you know what? They are entitled to how they feel about the game. And the latter, well, that person might absolutely be right, and the game genuinely might not make it past a few months of playtime. But something I wanted to discuss today actually goes a little bit further than that, and it's been very apparent in the asymmetrical multiplayer horror game community as of late, which is, will X game kill off Dead by Daylight? Now look, I'm not here to argue against DBD being basically the most popular asymmetrical horror game out there. It truly does reign supreme amongst the others in terms of how many people play it, and it's honestly not even fully close. However, this notion that one of these games will somehow surpass DBD and therefore kill its player base has honestly always puzzled me. This isn't even the first time I've heard this, and it certainly won't be the last either. I remember ever since the release of Friday the 13th, people talked about how it would potentially be a Dead by Daylight killer. To me though, I just never understood why anything has to kill anything though. Except maybe I guess the killers in the game, but...
Oh my god, can somebody clip that?
Besides that corny joke, sure, comparing games may not be a new concept, but there's a strange sense of trying to prove which game will be superior over one or the other, in the horror asymmetrical community especially. Today, that's why I want to talk to you about what makes Dead by Daylight unique, how newcomers in the series are dealing with getting into the subgenre, and why we need to allow nuance into this community rather than competitiveness. Okay, so DBD, right? Hear me out. You go to generators as a survivor, you do them, you don't get caught by the killer, you use your perks and items, and then you exit via a gate or through a hatch. And then as killer, well, you basically kill the survivors and don't let them escape with your perks and abilities. That's about it. That's genuinely the whole gameplay. So I mean, hey, pretty simple, right folks? I mean, that's honestly the reason why Dead by Daylight is fairly popular and easy to get into. It's really not overly complicated. Maybe trying to time your loops better, or how you dodge hits as a survivor, and when the time and aim with your abilities as a killer, and that might prove to be a little bit more complex, but that's pretty much it. Once you get a good layout of the maps and understand just exactly what you're doing, DBD can be picked up by almost everyone. I believe user Red Number Media kind of sums up the uniqueness also quite well when talking about how the pathing and positioning of using pallets skillfully can lead to greater loops, but killers can cut them off and prevent these loops if they're also skilled. The idea of using mind games to fake out the killer from knowing if you are going to drop the pallet, or maybe you will continue to loop them, which is similar for the killer, and potentially faking out where you're going to go so that way you can get a clean hit on the survivor. Not to mention that strategy is very important here, as you never want to drop a pallet too early, yet pre-dropping might be a good idea in some cases, whereas killers can, well, tunnel and camp. Yeah, that was a joke. Please don't do that excessively. Anywho though, as you can kind of see, my point has been made here. A lot of the gameplay around Dead by Daylight genuinely just goes around generators and pallets. It's not overly complicated to get into DBD, yet the more you progress and understand the game better, along with newer and better perks and items, you can definitely make the game more complex. Ease of entry meets gradual learning curve here. Eventually, you can learn how to become a decent enough survivor to where you can escape half the time, or maybe kill off at least half of the survivors almost every match you play. That's what makes DBD fun and entertaining for most people. Not to mention, if anyone has ever played an asymmetrical horror game before, they would have definitely played or at least heard about the existence of DBD. So with that being said, I think it's a good idea to shift our focus to some of the newer entries into the asymmetrical horror game genre. Now, before I even start, this is definitely not an exhaustive list by any means of asymmetrical horror games, and all of them can definitely be different as well. For this purpose, I'm going to be talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre and other PvP asymmetrical horror games, but it should be noted that games like Damned and even Half-Life 2 mods like The Hidden were influential in this subgenre of horror gaming that you see now. When I think of asymmetrical horror games, games like Friday the 13th, TCM, Evil Dead the game, and even Killer Klowns from Outer Space, the game that's coming up, come to mind when discussing this. I will tell y'all from the get-go that I genuinely, personally, honestly, have been enjoying TCM more than DBD. However, this is also not to say that I want this game to kill off DBD by any means. More or less the opposite, actually. But more on that later. I genuinely really enjoy the atmosphere of the game, and I usually am never a killer-oriented person in these games, but dang, Sissy kinda. Good with her poison. She's good with poisoning people, y'all. Don't even sim for her and her crusty muddy feet. Anyways, I really enjoy playing her and actually taking a direct approach at cutting off victims and hunting them down. The thing about this game though, at least in my opinion for survivors, is that it has quite the opposite effects of DBD. Hard to grasp at first, but once you understand it in the layout of the map, it can be quite easy to escape the family since you have learned the hard way on how to navigate the areas you're in. Not to mention that other characters like Johnny and especially the cook need a lot of practice initially how to use them, but can be highly rewarding once you do. I feel like this is also what Friday the 13th kind of went through as well. You were thrown into a huge map, not knowing what you really had to do at first, but once you learn where things relatively are, you know which exits are best to leave as the counselors, and as Jason, you know where to set traps and cut off the counselors. So that begs the question, do all of these other asymmetrical horror games have somewhat of a steep learning curve, but once you get it, it's relatively simple compared to the opposite of how DBD operates? Well, maybe, and besides that just being a whole mouthful of what I just said, we have to keep in mind that Gun Media has made both Friday and TCM, so that could definitely be the reason, but it seems even Evil Dead sort of deals with this as well. Now, I will be honest, I never played Evil Dead, but just reading about it and seeing some gameplay, it's apparent that the leveling system makes it hard, especially when playing as the demon, to pick up and truly understand. As Paquita from GameFAQs puts it, I'm a demon main from day one, and I just want to say, unless you're 35 plus, you're going to lose a large amount of your games, especially if you're playing as Puppet Master. The theme with Warlord is basic, Necro is also basic, and Puppet Master is supposed to be elite, but attack canceling fix killed it, and now it's mostly hit or miss and very underpowered. Even once you get to 35 plus, you're gonna go against some high level pre-mades who will either beat you soundly or you'll barely win due to timeout, especially if they have a certain team comp. And it actually makes sense why these games are like this, with such a high barrier to entry into this subgenre of gaming, not only because of how much it takes to make a functioning multiplayer game and maintain it, but also because DBD was one of the first games to be quote-unquote a founder in a sense. Games have to really differentiate themselves from DBD, which often leads to more complex and sometimes even enigmatic mechanics at times. However, we should still want to see more of these games, and I believe we should support the ones we truly do like. In terms of nuance, it's important for us to remember Monopoly. No, not the board game, but for some reason, Kid Me was obsessed with it. Maybe that kind of explains why one of my degrees is in business. Anywho, I do believe it's a good thing to maintain this balance of knowing that DBD will most likely remain the most popular asymmetrical horror game for years to come, but also have a sense of variety when getting into the subgenre and not falling to the pit of only playing DBD and think it's vastly superior over all of the other asymmetrical horror games. And also, I mean, not to mention, I definitely have seen a lot of people get burnt out on just solely playing DBD. So it's a good idea to want to expand your horizon and play more of the other games in this subgenre. At this point, I've accepted that DBD will be number one for a long time because of the simplistic mechanics, and not to mention how many franchises have joined the fray and the possibilities it opens up. Yes, I so badly want Springtrap in this game, don't judge me. We shouldn't want DBD necessarily to fail because its success, its build-up is honestly valid. And it's rather pointless to think the game is going to collapse by its competitors anytime soon. However, it's also important that this isn't the only game in this subgenre because, as I mentioned, DBD could easily monopolize this subgenre, and then we might be left with lazy developers who feel like they don't need to put as much effort into their game due to it having little to no competition. That's why games like TCM and Killer Klowns are so important, I feel like. They're here to give balance so that the scale doesn't tip so far over that DBD is the only game for asymmetrical horror game fans to enjoy. If I were to summarize all of this up, the best thing I could say is that we need to stop trying to see if each new asymmetrical horror game that pops up is going to be the new DBD killer. Because here's a little secret. Games can coexist with each other, and one does not need to destroy the other for success to be brought to one of them.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
Just because DBD has more players doesn't mean TCM is doing horribly, nor does that mean TCM is going to kill DBD because of its initial hype. Heck, TCM very well might fizzle out if updates are not a constant thing, but having the balance here is crucial if we want to see some really good and different games within this subgenre. I know for certain that I will be playing both TCM and DBD as well as Killer Klowns once it releases, and I'm glad I can enjoy all of them with my friends. It's always important to remember we don't have to put our perspective in a black and white fallacy of win or lose. It's perfectly acceptable to want multiple games to do as good as well as enjoy multiple games of the same subgenre.